Welcome to John Teaches Sean About His Brain, the podcast where I, Sean, embark on a journey to understand what's happening in my own head. Spoiler alert, I have no clue, but that's precisely why we're here. In each episode, I explore questions about the brain that I believe will resonate with all of us. Like, why can't I turn my brain off at 3 a.m.? Why my memory only works when it feels like it, and why my brain seems to betray me when I need it most. Listen, I'm not a scientist. I'm no expert. I'm just a guy looking to unravel the mysteries of my own mind. Fortunately, I happen to know a cognitive neuroscientist who is an expert in the brain, and I get to ask him all the questions I want. So, if you're curious, confused, or simply along for the ride, welcome. And hey, if you like what you hear, don't forget to like, follow, subscribe to the podcast, or whatever it is you do wherever you listen to podcasts. I don't know how the algorithms work. I just know that your support keeps this journey moving forward. And together, we might just discover something remarkable. This is John Teaches Sean About His Brain. Let's get started. Hi, John. It's good to see you.
Sean, it's good to see you too.
What's on your mind this week?
Well, I read something interesting that there's a survey that just came out about high school kids using AI in school. You know, AI now can basically write papers for you, write essays and papers. You can give it any topic. And it's pretty cool. I don't know if you've tried it, but
I have tried. I've messed with AI a little bit, and I really like some of the stuff that it, ChatGPT is what I think that's probably the most popular. But so I was playing around with it, just seeing what the breaking point was, like where it starts to make errors. Mm-hmm. And it was, to me anyway, pretty fascinating how much stuff it can pull and put together in 2 seconds.
It's crazy.
Internet. Yeah.
It's crazy. It's about like you can find facts about stuff, but it's also not very often, but once in a while I'm in charge of dinner. And usually when I'm in charge of dinner, I like bringing in pizza or chicken or something, but that's really not fair when, other people cook the whole time. So I try to cook sometimes. And I just tried it once. I put in, here's these 7 ingredients. What can I make for dinner? And it gave me like several different options that were really cool with the recipe with it and everything. So
that's interesting. Yeah.
AI is really cool. And I know it like draws pictures. You can have, you can request it to draw things, and you've probably seen it on social media. It gets crazy because it can draw almost anything, and it's using people's voices now.
Yeah. But back to my point is, I'll tell you this, since you bring it up, it's funny that, for this podcast, I was trying to come up with a picture of you and I, essentially. So a professor, and then, a public school educated dum-dum in a t-shirt. And so I put that into ChatGPT, and I'll tell you, the pictures that it was sending me were wildly, I don't want to say accurate, but they were really close to what I asked for. But in the background, like in one of them on the chalkboard, it had a whole bunch of words written on the chalkboard that were not words, that they weren't English words. And I was so unsure of myself, I looked up like 3 of the words, and they're not words. So to the point of AI is incredible, and I put in pretty specific commands, but what the artificial intelligence was returning was really good, but there were flaws in it, like the words written on the chalkboard in one. And I'm trying to remember, they just weren't right. And then we reach out to a high school student who draws a better picture than AI, based on our likeness, who comes up with the actual, I want to give credit because that's the pictures we're using for this podcast. So AI in that case was not as good as a human in this specific instance.
Yeah. No, I had a high school student, Izzy Gwynn, who drew the pictures for us and the animation for us, created all of that which is really cool. And it was, and interestingly, so I think I mentioned my daughter's a high school English teacher. So
Yes.
Izzy is in
Yeah.
her class and told her that she entered a contest for digital art in the state of Kansas and was disqualified because they said that she used AI. And she told them she had, but her art is so good. Her digital art is so good. They thought it was AI. And you can tell, I mean, what she did for us is just amazing.
It's amazing.
And
Way better than what AI came up with.
yeah, and my daughter was standing there watching her do it, and she's so quick and just super, super talented. So yeah, that's true. But that's a point where AI isn't as good. And I was talking to some people just to add to this. I'm getting off topic a little bit, but they were telling me I was talking to a guy who said his 80-year-old neighbor, 80-some-year-old neighbor, had received a call where the caller had used her grandson's voice that they'd gotten off social media, and AI had created the voice, and they were talking to her and asked her. She ended up giving them $3,000. It was her grandson that was in trouble, but it wasn't. It was a scammer. And that's where AI, because now it's imitating voices and
Yeah, that's where it
pictures
gets
and
scary.
videos. It's really bad. But going back
Yeah.
to the article, um, do you think high school kids use AI to write their papers?
Well, listen, I mean, I don't want to old man Sean here, but in my day, we just, had other people write our papers for us if
That's
we
right.
couldn't do it ourselves. So I don't, I don't know what the difference is between having an AI bot write it or a smart kid in my class write it. But I
Well,
mean, I'm not condoning cheating. Okay, don't cheat in high school. Do your work. That's the point. But yeah, I think they're using technology and probably AI to write their papers.
yeah, and in either case, you could probably tell if it was that student's, or a teacher could probably tell if it was
Yeah,
either another really smart student writing it or AI that wrote it. But yeah, in the U.S. high schools, over 70% of the students use AI for their term papers, which
really.
me being a professor, and I'm out of college now, I'm not in the classroom, but I've talked to colleagues who are still in the classroom, and it's becoming a real problem because it can cause a real gap in education. So most of the students use AI to help them write papers. I mean, I think it could be used as a tool, a really good tool in school and in college for other things, but to help you finish your homework, that's not real good because those are skills that you should develop as a student. So things like reading, comprehension, critical thinking, communication, all of those are skills that you need to learn. So students are supposed to get a topic, read about it from multiple sources, assimilate that information from all the different sources, um, kind of form in their mind a reasonable understanding of the subject and the subject matter so that they can use it, and then communicate that knowledge in writing. And then that's all being kind of worked around. It short circuits that whole process. So it's better if students don't use AI to write their papers. It's better for them, and it's better for our society, really, that
Yeah.
we move forward that way. Because what they don't understand is AI often is inaccurate and incomplete. And
Yes.
so they think they'll just, and plus, when you have somebody or something like AI give you the answers, you can read them, go, okay, that sounds reasonable, but you don't remember any of those answers. I would always tell my students, if you're trying to learn a topic, then get in a study group with somebody else and take turns being the teacher. So you teach them everything you know about the topic, and then let them teach you everything they know. And when you have to kind of regurgitate that and teach somebody where people are asking questions, it makes you develop a much deeper understanding of it. And that's kind of what writing does. You're teaching back through the written word, through pen and paper, or typing on the computer, what you know about it, which helps you learn it better. And you're just, short circuiting all of that.
I don't want to take too much time on this, but you just said writing or typing. Does it make any difference between the two from a learning standpoint? Is it? I just remember hearing somewhere or reading somewhere that actually writing it down helps you learn material better than typing it.
I'm not aware of that. That could be.
Yeah, I could have
That
just made
very well
that up
could
too.
be.
That I do a lot of bro science where I hear something once or I read half of something and then I start stating it as fact.
Yeah, bro
So,
science is okay as long as you confirm it.
oh no, I don't confirm it. I just
Oh,
tell a
okay.
whole bunch of people, and then once I say it enough, that just becomes now that's a fact.
It's not true bro science, I guess, if you confirm it, is it? Then it's just
No,
science.
then it's science.
Yeah, that's
See
true.
that you have
That's
to
true.
right. Bro science is just I overhear half of it or read half of it, and then I start disseminating that as fact.
Yeah, then I mean it's awesome to be, what do they call it, a garage
I'm a
neuroscientist?
garage neuroscientist.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great. That's great. That's a lot easier to do it that way, to be honest with you.
Well, it's easier for me. I don't have to do the work,
Yeah.
And as long
Yeah.
as I say it confidently, then people believe it. So,
And I guess most of the schools in the U.S., going back to the survey, have policies where AI is not to be used at all in the in school, even as a tool. And then some of a small number of schools allow AI, but they give guidance around it. But none of them allow you to write papers. And when they ask students about that, they knew that they were breaking the school rules using AI, but when they were asked about the ethical issues behind that, like they didn't really see it as cheating, because it's, well, I'm going to the computer to get the information anyway. It's just the computer's going ahead and writing it down for me. So I was
right.
going to do that anyway. So that's not really cheating, which it is. And then they didn't understand the negative impact to their learning, which I don't think any high school student does. You don't care about
No.
learning. You're just trying to get through school. So
Everything you just said when you were talking about ingesting the information, comprehending what it means, and then being able to write it down, all those different skills. Again, you just said it. For me, I just wanted to get out of high school.
yeah.
If I could just get a diploma and get out of there. And I think that's where and it's probably not just this country, but we're failing most of the students, at least at public school. In my experience, I went to public school. Both my kids went to public school.
Mm-hmm.
And not hating on the district or the teachers are doing everything they can, but I think the system is set up just at least in Washington State for the students to pass the test,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there's a lot of things tied into test scores, and so you're just trying to get the students to pass the test. When I mean, now looking back, I want teachers to teach kids how to learn,
Mm-hmm.
how to be
Mm-hmm.
curious, how to, all of those things instead of just getting them to pass a test, which I think that in no small part contributes to the students going, I just want to pass a test, get my diploma and get out of here and move on with my life.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And if I were to ask you your favorite teacher and to describe some of those qualities, it probably turns out that they helped you learn how to learn, and they made the material interesting, and there's some really good teachers out there doing that.
Yeah.
My wife,
They make it fun, right? Like, and make me want to
absolutely.
learn.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
My
you were
wife's a
saying
public
about your wife. Yeah.
school teacher. My
Yep.
daughter is, I'm in education. So I get it. It's so important. There's so many issues to it, but maybe someday we can invite a guest on to talk about that.
I would
Maybe.
love to. No, I would love to table this particular topic and then try to get. If only we knew some teachers, but
Yeah.
get a
Somebody.
teacher or two on here so I can rant against the public school system for an hour. But, I do want to. In the last episode, you kind of introduced us to the iceberg analogy,
hmm
and we were talking about some things that can raise the water level or pull the iceberg underwater, either way you want to look at it. And actually, listener, if you have not listened to the episode on the iceberg, I highly recommend you pause this, go back and listen to that episode, and then jump back into this one, because what I want to talk about is to go back to the iceberg, but specifically how stress affects the waterline. And so it would be helpful for me because I hear stress talked about, and it's funny. I was talking to a friend of my wife, and I have this friend Michelle, and I was talking about the podcast, and about stress, and she said you should have me as a guest on the show because I know all about stress. So what she was talking about was Christmas, the holidays, and everything that's wrapped into that: families, dinners, presents, shopping. And so I don't even know what kind of stress that is, but I hear people talk about that kind of stress. I've heard you talk about some different types. So I want to dig in with you right now about some of the different types of stress and how they affect the waterline and some of the other effects of stress.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think everybody is an expert in stress if you're talking about experiencing it, because we all do and we all have it at some point. But I think that I think it's good to also think about, when we're talking about different things, to realize that everything has its purpose. I think I've tried to do that in the other podcast as well, to talk about the good side of things. So there's a really good side to stress, because
Really?
yes,
Okay, I've
stress
never heard this angle before. I'm fascinated.
is called eustress, is how it's studied, and that's the positive side of stress.
Okay.
And it's with acute stress, which acute stress means that an incident that comes up that creates stress. So
So it's
it's an
like a
event.
like a sudden. How do you? I mean, acute. What's a good way to describe that?
So it's like an event. Like if
Okay.
you're uh, driving your car and it's an icy road and you're starting to slide and you get really stressed, that's a good thing, because when you get stressed in those moments, your brain works to help focus all of your attention to try to overcome that obstacle or that event or the cause of the stress. So you get really focused, performance goes up. It helps you get through that. You get really tense for your muscles to control the steering wheel. If you're like, walking down an alley or something and somebody says, hey, confront you, then stress is good, because the fight, flight, freeze kicks in to help you through that. If you have a project that's due at work that has to be done by Friday and you hear about it Wednesday and all this stress floods in, that's because your brain and your body is getting you ready to put everything into that project to be sure you can complete it by Friday.
Well, hey,
So those
okay.
are
So,
examples of acute stress.
but so that last example. Um, so again, this is my brain. Just when you say an event, I'm thinking of a very short time. You said you're driving a car and it starts to skid.
Hmm.
The stress, all the things you described happen. I control the skid and I'm out of it, and then the stress starts to dissipate. Right?
Yes.
Is that correct? So, but
Yes.
if I'm at work and I am told of a project due Friday and they tell me on Wednesday, um, if I'm stressed the whole time, right, all day, Wednesday night, I don't sleep well because I'm thinking about the project. Same thing Thursday. Friday, the project's due, I turn it in.
Hmm.
So there's like 2.5 or 3 days of stress. Is that still acute? That's still considered acute stress?
Yes, it's because it's
Okay.
around that one event.
Okay.
And it's still beneficial for you to have that stress to complete the project, because that helps an even longer term goal, not the 2 day goal of getting the project in, but a longer term goal of keeping your job and being successful and getting praise from other people, like great project and those types of things. So small sacrifices up front are worth the larger gains on the back end. And so let's talk a
Okay.
little bit about what happens, and then I can use some of the physiological effects to describe it a little bit better.
Great. Okay.
Um, so this all happens in the back channel, underwater, in the big chunk of ice underwater in the iceberg. So now we're going underwater into the iceberg, and there's what's called the autonomic nervous system, and it is a net zero gain system, meaning that it has two parts to it, really a sympathetic system and a parasympathetic. I know I'm throwing a lot of labels and terms out here, but it has these two systems that try to balance each other. And when I say it's a net zero gain system, that means that as one becomes more active, the other one has to become less
Mm.
active. And then when one's less active, it means the other is more active. They can't both be highly active at the same time. They have to balance to zero. And that system helps set homeostasis, for example.
Okay. So the autonomic
Yes.
system, that's the complete system, correct?
Yes.
And it's made up of two subsystems, so to speak. So parasympathetic,
Hmm.
what is that?
The parasympathetic is the rest and digest system. It calms the body. It keeps you calm. That's when there's no stress around. It calms you down, and it's also regenerative. It kind of builds back your energy store a little bit.
Okay. Rest and digest is that.
Is a good way to remember it. And
That's
then
I like stuff like that. That helps me. And
it's
then
helpful.
the other
The sympathetic
subsystem,
system is the
sympathetic.
fight, flight, freeze system, or the fight, flight system, or fight, flight, freeze.
Okay.
So you have rest and digest, and you have fight, flight, freeze. And that one is what helps you respond. And I'm going to throw some more terms at you. The HPA axis is something in the brain, and it stands for the H stands for the hypothalamus. You probably heard of it.
Yes.
The P is for the pituitary gland,
Okay.
and the A is for the adrenal gland.
Adrenal gland. I could have guessed that one, I think.
Yeah, good. So
Okay. I'm learning.
HPA is the axis. Those three working together control your stress response. And as you know, the pituitary and the adrenal produce the hormones that travel through your body. So
Mm-hmm.
with stress, you have hormones like cortisol, adrenaline, those types of things. So those
So
help. Yeah,
so
go
we're
ahead.
in the event. The car's starting to slide,
Yep.
and the sympathetic system kicks in,
Yes.
and at the same time, the parasympathetic has to go down
Yes.
because it's zero sum. And so once that system kicks in, now hormones get involved through
That's
the
right.
HPA, right? So we have all the flood of hormones
Yes.
that are going to help us to respond to this event, this car sliding, whatever it may be.
Right.
Okay.
And so the HPA axis will kick in, and that's really the start of the sympathetic system, fight, flight, freeze. And I just thought of an example of this, of the balance between them. You've heard when people get really, really scared, really, there's a lot of like survival stress, then the sympathetic system gets so active that the parasympathetic really drops off. And in fact, it will like void the bladder and the bowels and different things to get ready to run or fight. When I grew up on a small little ranch, cattle ranch, 60 acres. We had cattle and horses and things like that. And our house set about an eighth of a mile off the road. It was a gravel drive that went up. So it was a fairly long gravel drive. And in kindergarten, the bus would stop at the end of it was on a highway. So it'd stop on the highway, and I would walk down the gravel road to the house. And I wore cowboy boots every day. And I was walking home one day. I got started. I'd been walking for a little bit, but I wasn't very far. And our lane was a long lane, but at the end it had a circle on it so that you could turn around. And I was walking up, and my mom, now I was in a really small town in Kansas, but she had told me stories about the black market, that people would kidnap children.
I'm sorry I'm laughing at this, but just
Well, yeah, because there's no neighbors, nobody around. I
no
go to a
one
little
around.
tiny school.
Yeah.
But the black market, people will kidnap children and take them to Florida and sell them.
Oh.
Yeah, so I was kind of afraid of Florida too. And I was definitely afraid of the black market. I had no idea what it was.
I think more rightfully afraid of Florida than the black market. But go on.
So I was, even though I don't even know if I'd ever really met a stranger. I was told, strangers are bad. So don't talk to strangers. Definitely don't talk to strangers. Don't get in a stranger's car.
Don't get in a van with no windows.
A van. Exactly.
Okay.
Because they'll take you to Florida and sell you on the black market. So I was walking home from kindergarten, and all of a sudden I heard gravel crunching behind me, tires on it. And I turned around, and there was this old pickup truck that kind of pulled up closer to me, and a guy leaned out the passenger's window. And I think it was fall, because it was start of the year. I didn't have a coat on, so it wasn't cold, I know. But he had on a stocking cap on his head, and he had like really shaggy, it wasn't a full beard, but it was like a patchy, shaggy beard. And he looked kind of dirty and scary. And he leaned out and he said, "Hey kid, you want to ride?" to me on my gravel lane. And I just said no. And I took off running as hard as I could in my cowboy boots on the gravel, my ankles twisting back and forth, screaming, "Mom!" I mean, as loud as I could scream. And I was just running, and it kept following me. and it kept following me. And I ran and I started around one side of the circle, and it followed me around that side of the circle. And I can't explain the fear. That's the first time I had fear like that. And I was still calling my mom. She heard me.
Mm-hmm.
She came out on the front porch and just stood there watching, and she waved at me. And I'm going, what is she doing? These people are trying to grab me. They're right behind me.
They're going to take me to Florida.
Mom, I don't want to go to Florida. So they follow me up, and I finally ran up to her, and they stopped out at where the circle kind of started to turn by the house. And the guy got out of the truck, and it was just complete fear. And he walked over and got the trash can and dumped it in the back. It was the trash truck service. And then they got in and drove away and waved. And I couldn't get my breath. And Mom, I just remember my mom saying, "What happened, John?" And I looked down, and the front of my pants was just soaking wet. I had just wet my pants. I was running as hard as I could. It literally scared the pee out of me. It was, I was so afraid. So my sympathetic system was in such high gear. The parasympathetic system said, dump everything, because we need to lighten the load so we can run really fast and we can fight so we don't have to go to Florida. By the way, I've been to Florida since, and I've lived in Florida. I love Florida. So I didn't see any black markets while I was down there.
Okay. Thank you for the disclaimer on that one. No black markets that you saw.
I didn't see any. No, I loved living there. That was great. But yeah. So that's how the system's balance.
Yeah. I've never, people wetting their pants, even adults, like you're 5 or 6 years old and that level of fear, but there's adults who have voided their bladder in extreme circumstances. But you're again saying that there's a reason, there's a good thing. And that's, you're trying to get as light as you can to run or fight.
Right. You probably know people, because being in the military and law enforcement, that's happened to as adults.
As adults. Yeah. But I've never thought about, again, you keep saying there's good things out of these things, and I've never considered that before.
Well, yeah, that might be stretching it to say if you wet your pants in front of your peers as an adult that it's a good thing. But
right, not a good thing, but a purpose. Like there's a purpose behind these things that happen to us, which is the whole point of this podcast. Is things happen to regular people, and maybe we don't always understand why they happen.
Yeah, or if you've just eaten a meal and survival stress comes in, you might throw it up because you're again getting rid of that. So that doesn't always happen when you're stressed. Thank goodness.
No, we're talking extreme examples, but the rest and digest. If there is no stress and I just eat a meal, and that parasympathetic system is kicked up, big meal maybe, whatever it is, but then my that sympathetic is low.
Right.
Because I want to keep going back to the balance between those two.
That's good.
Because zero sum.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Okay.
And then that's also why you're a little bit more lethargic after you eat and you want to rest. You get a little bit sleepy because that parasympathetic system is kicking in and helping you rest, digest, replete your energy that you've spent and things like that. So the sympathetic system drops low, which it needs to do. But then when we're talking about that, that's like acute stress. And so when there's an event, and for that system to do what it's supposed to do, the HPA axis, to kick the sympathetic system into gear for the fight, flight, freeze, it needs resources to do that. And we talked about this. It'll pull the iceberg underwater a bit for a short amount of time so that it can kind of control the stress response in the event. And then it will, after the event, like you said, the iceberg will reemerge, kind of pop back up out of the water, and all the adrenaline and cortisol and things will slowly kind of wash out of the bloodstream, and you get back to a normal kind of homeostasis. So those systems start to balance out. But then there's another type of stress called chronic stress that is not good. There's not really a good side to chronic stress. This is where stress lasts for an extended amount of time.
Okay.
And it can be from several things, but like just life issues starting to build up and kind of pull you down. Financial pressure. If you're in a bad situation at work where either you're not getting along with colleagues, or there's an abusive colleague, or your supervisor, is really hard on you. Those types of things, usually from just life happening, can create stress over a period of time. And now, if you think about the iceberg, that type of stress, if the brain was if an iceberg was the size of the brain, small enough that you could hold it, let's say,
Right.
it would be like dropping ball bearings inside of it at the bottom, and it just slowly starts weighting it
Just
down.
weighting it down.
And it starts sinking little by little and getting lower and lower. And there's no balance to the system. The HPA axis, it's HPA axis dysregulation, where it becomes overactive for an extended amount of time.
Because in the example you're using, those hormones are constantly flooding the system.
Yeah, they start to flood it. So you have elevated levels of
Mm-hmm.
stress hormones for an extended period of time. And then that's not good, because the elevated levels of stress start to have other effects, like cardiovascular effects, for your heart, blood pressure and things like that start to go up. And there's several things that like immune system problems, you're more likely to get sick when you have this chronic stress, and your sympathetic system is high because you have cortisol and adrenaline, more of that in your system, which are good for short term, but they're bad long term.
So good for acute, for an event,
Mm-hmm.
but this is not an event. This is an extended amount of time that you're stressed.
Yeah, and then if you think about the fight, flight, freeze response, if that's active for a long period of time, then it starts to become overactive and desensitized, and then it causes other problems. So even probably more scary than just some of the things we've talked about is that elevated levels of cortisol over time
Mm-hmm.
can do damage to the brain, like shrink certain brain areas like the hippocampus. And you probably know that the hippocampus is responsible for
For
consolidating
your
memories.
memory. Yeah.
Yep. And
So wait, so cortisol over an extended amount of time can actually shrink the physical structure of the brain,
yes,
parts of the brain.
that's right. The parts that use it, that it affects the most, it can start shrinking those areas, because it yeah, it's meant to kind of control and tamp down certain areas so that it can do other things. But then when you leave that, doing that for a long time, it can affect that. It can affect the prefrontal cortex. So, that's for like decision making,
Mm-hmm.
self regulation, things like that. So it leads to memory issues. People they're more agitated and get upset when they're under stress because the prefrontal cortex isn't functioning properly. It feels like that I need to do something. That fight, flight, freeze is kicked in and it's flowing, but there's no threat right here. But you snap at people, or you're more agitated. It really affects. There's a decline in concentration levels, where the on channel can focus. Your conscious awareness focuses on what's happening all around you, and that starts to get lost. So it's hard to focus. You feel kind of fuzzy and in a cloud. Learning abilities decrease, and it can be really. So we're talking about something that can have life effects. And I'll
Yeah.
give you an example. My sister, um, her and her husband own several businesses in a small town. He was a chiropractor, so they had a chiropractic office. They own an antique store, a little cafe, some different things like that. So all of those cost stressors, because you're trying to keep your business running and
Right.
your
Yeah.
business up and stuff like that. A business burned. They're going through that. Their son, my nephew, was killed in a car accident, which was
Oh
really
no.
stressful. And it was
Yeah.
not long after that my sister was driving to the grocery store. So think about all the life stressors I was talking about. And then
You said
also,
one of the businesses burned.
yeah, fire. It
Okay.
caught fire and burned, and they were dealing with
Okay.
And
Loss of a child.
I think that was a little bit different timing, but it was all kind of, it just
Yeah.
is all building
Yeah.
and building. And it was after my nephew was killed in the car accident that my sister was driving to the grocery store,
Okay.
and she said I was going down the road, over 30 miles an hour, like 30 to 35 miles an hour. And she said, I don't know what my mind was just somewhere else. And she said, I don't know if I thought I was already at the grocery store or what, but I was thinking about, I've got to get this at the grocery store. And she said, I just opened my door to step out, not even
Doing
understanding,
35
realizing.
miles an hour.
Yeah. And she said, luckily my seatbelt was on, and when it all kind of
Oh,
woke me up, and I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? And shut the door and kept driving. But that's that decline in concentration and understanding the on channels underwater. It's not taking in information and processing it correctly. It's just this system is being overrun. The sympathetic system is overrunning the parasympathetic system at that point.
wow.
So it's really unhealthy.
Yeah. And so when we were talking in the beginning and you said stress is a good thing, most of the time there's some good in it, but it feels like chronic stress it's somewhat new to us as human beings with brains, the way we're designed, the way that we're made. I'm thinking about, financial pressure, about being in a job that, any of the things you named. We have a boss that's, or a coworker or whatever it is. It feels like these are all problems that we're not that we're making. How do I say that the right way? But, survival stress is to keep us alive so that, again, we stay alive. We do the things that we're supposed to be doing. This is more financial stress, being worried about money, being worried about businesses, all of those things feel like that there are things we could get out of in theory, but we just keep kind of. I don't want to quit my job because I don't want to try to find another job, whatever the reason may be, and I just keep loading this stress on. And I've never really thought about or been told all of the negative effects of something like this. I just think if people knew, if I was like, I'm going to stick out this job for another 5 years, or I'm going to, do this thing, and not understanding the negative effects of all these hormones and the systems, the lack of concentration, all of the things you just named,
Yeah.
it might inspire people to make some drastic life decisions
That would probably be good. And like you
for
said,
the good.
and these are like side effects from the system we've created. We've created
Yeah.
our system that we live in, which also has a lot of good to it. Like I mentioned the other day, I don't have to go, if I don't plant the corn or it doesn't rain,
Right.
I'm not going to die from that because I've got Taco Bell. I can go get something. So that,
Yes.
there's things about the system that are good, but you're right. These are kind of like side effects. And then, we've talked about what happens in the sympathetic system, the fight, flight, freeze, about how because of all the extra cortisol and things, how it's affecting the system. But on the other side of the balance, the parasympathetic system is suppressed. Its activity dampens or is suppressed during stress, and that leads to its own set of problems. So if your system doesn't have the ability to relax and recover,
Mm-hmm.
then that leads to chronic tension. So it can lead to like headaches, muscle pains, things like that. Digestion is messed up, which affects your gut health, and chronic bowel syndrome. These other things, are irritable bowel and stuff like that, can be from that because the digestive system can't take the time it needs. So even if you're eating healthy foods, it can't pull the nutrients out of those healthy foods like it should, because you're never letting it rest and digest.
Mm-hmm.
So now the food just kind of goes through the system. You're missing the nutrients. You have, bowel issues. The immune system's weakened, so you're more vulnerable to
You get sick more
infections
often.
and sicknesses. Yeah, you can't relax, so it's hard to go to sleep. So insomnia can be a side effect of this, or poor sleep quality. Maybe you wake up like 8 times in the night. You're thinking about all these. And the minute you wake up, you think, okay, I'm going to roll over and go back to sleep. And then all of these problems start flooding your mind. Like, oh, I've got these bills that I can't pay. What's going to happen here? Or, oh man, I've got to go to work in a couple of hours and I don't want to. And, those types of things
Yeah.
can start, and then you can't
Yeah.
sleep again. So it's problems on kind of on both sides of that. And then kind of the combination of those can lead to mood disorders like depression, anxiety, those types of things, sleep disorders that I mentioned, and then also addictive behaviors like substance abuse, because you're trying to find that out. I've got to find a place where I don't have to face this. So if I drink a lot or if I take these drugs, that gets me to a new place where I don't have to think about all this and I feel good for a little bit. And then so you're wanting to do that more and more, and then it's harder to recover from it, and then that starts affecting your work. It can be really bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I'm thinking about law enforcement, because it's not chronic. I wouldn't put it as chronic stress. On the job, it's like it's not always that, but it's also not acute stress. But I'm thinking about the health of law enforcement officers, right?
No,
Like
that's chronic. That's chronic stress. The
that
acute
is
stress
chronic
is that,
stress.
yeah, the acute stress is that moment that they are faced with something
Mm-hmm.
that then that event ends. So think of it, acute stress has a start point and end point that you can see. Like that's where it started and that's where it ended. Chronic stress, you don't really know. Like it's just things are adding to it all the time.
So yeah, so that's acute. That's acute stress.
If you
Did you?
if you know the start and the end to it, that's acute
Okay,
stress.
good, but it's an event. But then what about a series of events stacked up on police work again?
Yeah. Uh, so yeah, I don't want to be misleading here, because if you have several calls in a row over several nights where there's the event stress involved in that, so there's some type of uh, like survival threat of harm or something,
Mm-hmm.
or not, maybe not even to you, but to somebody else, and you have to resolve that. If you're not allowing enough time to wash out, then that can be bad. And I think where police, from what I understand, for police officers, the problem can be work schedules, like shift schedules.
Yeah.
I had a uh, police administrator one time say, you know, I was just asking what's your shift schedules, and he was saying, well, for 2 weeks, like just take one officer for 2 weeks, that officer will work a third shift, and then the next 2 weeks they'll work a second shift, and then the next 2 weeks, and then they go back to third, or maybe it's for 3 weeks at a time or four
Yeah.
weeks, and everybody, so that nobody has to just be stuck on third. And I was looking at their shift schedule, and I said, if you ask me to create a shift schedule that would screw people up the most, it would be this
It would be
exact
this.
schedule. This would
Exactly.
be, I
Yeah.
couldn't mess this schedule up any more than you've already messed it up, because now you're not letting officers go rest and get the rest and digest periods. They're not getting much sleep. You continue to disrupt sleep cycles. Like every 2 weeks, you're making them create a new sleep cycle. It's like
Yep.
traveling to Europe for 2 weeks, coming back to the US for 2 weeks, traveling to Europe and it's just like jet lag and everything messes you up so bad. That's what we're doing. And research has shown that lack of sleep that a lot of like police officers and some other professions get, it's almost like somebody is intoxicated to a certain level. Like your thinking is lowered, your ability to deal with stress lowers, your resilience is lower, and now you're out dealing with the public with all of these things you're fighting, trying to be at your best, and you're just set up to fail, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
And
there's another part. Sorry to interrupt you.
no,
There's
go ahead.
another part to policing that those, if there's a lot of events right in a row and you don't get your sleep, and and your nutrition is usually bad. I'm assuming, I've heard that
Yeah.
cops they don't have time to eat. They've got, during their break for lunch, they're writing all the reports and stuff. So I've even heard some of them can go like 8 hours without even taking a drink of water. It's like, it's crazy what they do and put their bodies through. So you have all that stress, but then you've got other types of stress with, uh, officers getting along. There's probably a lot of ego, testosterone and competition. And so
You
you're
could
always
say
trying to
that, yeah.
stay on top of
Hmm.
that. And that can over time start to cause stress. And then just, I think the biggest stressor is just seeing the worst part of humanity over and over again. I've
Yeah.
been on a couple of ride-alongs, and when I got done with like 4-hour ride-alongs each time, I'm going, I could never do this job. I can't believe everything you go through, and dealing with people with mental health issues, dealing with people that are homeless. There's lack of hope. You have to, if you think about an emotional regulator, you kind of have to turn it down so that you don't become overwhelmed and burn out by seeing all this emotional ruin from humans. But then if you turn it down, now you're not empathetic and you don't treat people like you should. So you have to turn the emotional regulator back up so that you can be a decent person to other people, but then you're taking on some of their stuff. It's extremely difficult.
Yeah, it's a tough job, but we don't make it easier on them either. Like you just said, one of the many things is the sleep schedule, and there's a lot of other stuff that we pile on and then expect them to perform at a superior level at all times.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of expectations out of them. And I don't have the stats for this, so I'm going to do bro science here for a minute.
Oh, I love it. I'm into
But
that.
but I've heard that suicide rates in law enforcement are higher than normal professions, and that divorce rates are higher than in normal
Absolutely.
professions. Is that true?
I do know the suicide rates. Unfortunately, I wished I didn't, but the this is something I don't think that we talk about in law enforcement or just in general. Is that we talk about officers killed in the line of duty and the like. The suicide rates in law enforcement are far higher than the number of officers we lose in the line of
Mm,
duty.
mm,
And unfortunately, we're reaching the end of 2024. They keep going up.
mm,
So we're higher in 24 than we were in 23, and more in 22,
mm.
and that's it's not something that I want necessarily to talk about, but we have to bring attention to the fact that um, law enforcement officers take their own life at a much higher rate than we lose officers in the field. And
Yeah,
there's and that's why I like talking about the what can we do,
mhm,
because there are some things that we could change. We can't change the job. They're going to be going to these calls. Everything that you just talked about with, going to one call and having to be empathetic and be somewhat of a counselor or a mental health, dealing with someone in a mental health crisis or behavioral health crisis, and then, going to stopping somebody for driving recklessly and writing them a ticket. Like everything, I think at least the general public probably understands on the surface. They go to a lot of different calls, but
mhm,
what that does to the body,
mhm,
specifically when we're talking about this stress, um, and whether acute stress because there's this event, and then survival stress kicks in for the officer and all the things that happen there,
mhm.
um, but then the chronic stress. So just all of the stress and all those hormones, and then it's really tough.
It
Um,
is.
it's
It's
really tough
really
for
tough. And
them.
if you're in a profession, like I said, that's more macho, more competitive, it's really hard to seek help for that. It's like, just deal with it, dude. Just buck up, pull your boots on and go. Let's
I,
not
I
sit and feel
will
sorry for ourselves.
I will say, and this is a very general statement, but I think that law enforcement is getting better at so I don't. We kind of took a turn, but in where I'm from, I'm in Tacoma, Washington, but the police department here, they were forward thinking enough that a while back they hired a psychologist to and it was free for any officer to go see. Hopefully I'm not screwing this up too bad. This was one of the officers was sharing with me that and actually I take that back. I'm sorry. It was a psychologist that was sharing this with me, but he said he would just kind of float around the department, just walk around and just to be seen and get to know people. And he said in the narrows or the hallways were pretty narrow, but cops would walk against the wall to get away from him in the beginning. He said he'd be
I know
walking
what
down the
that feels
hall,
like.
and they would like brush against the wall to get out of his way, to not even touch him, right? And the more he was around and got to know people and say hi or whatever, and now, or at least recently, when I was talking to him, there are cop cars parked outside of his office,
That is
and there are
awesome.
officers in uniform that are going up and talking to him up in his office, right? So that's, to me, that's the side that gives me hope for the
Yes.
profession and for agencies, that to start removing the stigma a little bit of, it's okay to talk to a professional. It's okay to admit that you're having problems.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's good. And that's good. Sounds like the psychologist is
he's
also
pretty
helping
awesome.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it, right? Is it takes the right personality I think you'd be good at it too, but just to be like, yeah, I know they don't want to talk to me. They don't even want to touch me. Like they
Yeah.
turn around when they see me coming, and kind of laugh about it, because,
Hmm. Well,
you got to be
he
pretty
knows
strong.
why. He knows
Yeah.
why.
Yeah.
Um, so, my knowledge of that's what I see on TV shows, where it's like the punishment if you have to go see the psychologist. So the
Yeah.
TV shows are usually not accurate. So I like hearing this other side of it. That's
Yeah,
great.
because most of us believe that what we see on TV and movies is real.
It's
So
real.
you go,
Absolutely.
you get into some situation, and then you got to go see the psychologist, and they take your gun and your badge and
I've
all that
watched The
nonsense.
Wire. I know
Yeah.
how it
Oh,
works. Yeah.
it's a great show. I love The Wire. Um,
So let's now, I mean, we've talked about how do we restore balance? Because there is a way to restore balance between these systems. Like if you're under stress and you're in chronic stress, it's not like, well, there's nothing you can do about it. There's ways to restore that balance. So do you want to talk a
okay.
little bit about that?
I think that's where we need to wrap this up, is how do we restore that balance?
Okay. So some of this might sound like that's not really going to help, is it? And I can tell you that what I'm about to tell you absolutely does help. There's a ton of research behind this. So these are the good things. And one, it's the first one is so simple, but it's to practice deep breathing, because deep breathing activates the parasympathetic system, the rest and digest system. And it's as simple as, and there's so many different ways to do it, but it's as simple as just taking a breath in through your nose really slow and long, maybe 3 to 5 seconds, just, and then holding it for a couple of seconds and then letting it go really slow. And I've heard different ways, like breathe, in through your nose, hold, out through your mouth, hold. But some of the latest research says the nose in and out is the best, not to use the mouth. But you can do it. Anything's better than nothing.
So
But
hey, I'm sorry. So don't breathe, even exhale through the mouth? That
well,
research is saying just through the nose, in and out.
some of the latest research is saying the nose in and out is the best.
Oh,
But mouth in, mouth out is better than nothing. Nose in, mouth out is better than nothing. I mean, just
yeah.
the idea of the really slow, long breath, because that's what starts to activate the parasympathetic system again and going, okay, we're going to restore some of this balance here. And you probably should, like, if you just do that for 5 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes in the evening, just twice a day, it's going to make a really big difference. And in fact, you'll start looking forward to that time because it just kind of calms everything. And while you're doing it, focus on thinking about your breathing. So it's more about, I want to focus on my breathing, because if you're just breathing and letting your mind wander, it's going to go right back to all the problems and the issues that
Right.
cause all the stress.
Right.
So really focus on breathing and counting, or maybe even imagine that you're breathing in relaxation and you're blowing out stress or tension. So you
In
can
with the
kind of,
good, out with the bad
yeah, you can do
when
that
you're
kind of
breathing.
stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I
So
always
that's,
heard that in through the nose, hold, out through the mouth is the best way to do it, which you
mhm.
said it's better than nothing. But even just in through the nose, hold, out through the nose, and focus on your breathing
Mm-hmm.
to keep you kind of mindful, to keep you in the moment, not thinking about all the problems.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
right.
So deep breathing.
Exercise, even if it's just walking, exercise
Okay.
starts to burn off adrenaline and cortisol and some things like that. So walking, jogging, any type of exercise really, but just being out and being active. Being active is important, because when you sit, those hormones pool, and again, you're not, you're sitting, it's it's just kind of the cycles just keeps going. So exercise is good.
Exercise. Okay.
Healthy sleep patterns are good. So even if you can't sleep, set a reasonable time to go to bed every night. Even if for the first 4 nights you lay there for 2.5 hours staring at the ceiling, eventually your system's going to start adjusting to that so that you get a good sleep cycle, and just make yourself stay in bed for a certain amount of time. And then
Hmm.
you'll start adjusting to that. And then probably the one that might be the most difficult to do. Well, no, that's not necessarily true. But the last one is to address the stressors, like try to face them, and usually, and not by yourself, but usually if you have a strong friend network or family network, you can talk to somebody, or maybe there's somebody at work. Like if it's a work issue, just start talking to somebody at work, because what's also stressful at work is when you feel like you're doing a meaningless task over and over, or you don't have control over your work and what you're doing during the day. Somebody else controls everything you're doing. Those can be really stressful and lead to this chronic stress. So if you talk to somebody at work about it, maybe they're experiencing the same thing, you can, get that off your chest, so to speak, and then you can even come up with some ways to maybe address it, and make a joke out of it, even, or I don't know, just kind of the banter back and forth, and you understand somebody else is going through that same thing is helpful. And then if you feel the stress is really bad, or if you're noticing problems in relationships and things because you're irritable and angry and stuff like that, then please seek professional help. It can be your medical doctor or psychologist or somebody, just to talk about it, because they have they can talk to you and come up with a plan to really help you balance this system and get control of your life again.
Well, those all seem easily attainable to try
Yeah,
to deal with this.
they're not too high of goals. I mean, you can
No. Deep
practice
breathing, get some
breathing,
sleep, exercise.
exercise. Yeah,
Yeah. And then it is
exactly.
helpful to have a strong network of friends and family to talk to. But I've never been to therapy, but I'm not anti. I think that some people, therapy is the people that I do know that have gone to therapy just to talk to somebody, um,
Hmm.
has been successful. So I
Yeah,
think that's good
yeah,
advice too.
yep.
Yeah. So I have to tell you. So yesterday, my son and his family came over to make cookies, Christmas cookies. But my granddaughters, so I have a 4-year-old granddaughter and then a newborn granddaughter. But the 4-year-old, and listen, I'm going to just say up front, I know every grandparent thinks their grandkids are the best thing ever. I know, and I think it's great. So, but I'm saying I know that when I say this, that this 4-year-old, the stuff that she says, that she comes up with, I'm like, how is this kid smarter than me already at 4? Um, and and so we were talking just about this stuff, the way her brain seems to work, how quickly she picks things up, just so smart. And it made me think about, I've always heard, and I've even said, that kids' brains are like sponges. When they're that age, they just seem to learn so much quicker than I do. So at 50, it feels like it takes me so much longer to learn something. She seems to be learning at an accelerated rate. And like I said, I doubt that she's alone, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on the idea that, kids, number one, brains are like sponges, and that they just learn so much faster than adults do.
I have met your granddaughter, and I would agree that she does learn faster than most. She is sharp.
She's smarter than me. You can say it. I've accepted this as a fact.
I don't want to cause stress
No, no.
to
Well,
you,
yeah,
but yeah,
maybe.
no. Um, no, this is really interesting, because there is that idea that kids' brains are like sponges, and they learn faster than adults. So I think that so this might be a myth that we need to debunk.
Okay. Okay.
So
I'm glad I brought it up.
so let's think first about the difference between learning and adapting. So if kids learn faster than adults, that's one thing. If kids adapt faster than adults, that's a different thing. So if we're talking about adapting, then kids probably can adapt quicker than adults. Because if you think about it, they have very few experiences. So it's almost like they start with a blank slate. I probably shouldn't have said that because nobody actually starts with a blank slate. There's that idea of, the tabula rasa, that everybody
Mm-hmm.
starts with a blank slate and it's just experience that writes on those slates. That's not true, because there's, genetics, DNA, things that's already pre-wired when we're born, but their experiences, they don't have many. So there's not much that anchors them to one thing. They can adapt more quickly to new things because they're not anchored to a bunch of old things. And the older you get, the harder that can become. So you've heard,
You can't teach an old dog new tricks,
that's
right?
exactly right. That's one. And then you say, oh, that person's just set in their ways.
Set in their ways.
So the older you get, the more experiences you have. And so now that I have just this load of experience, then I don't see the need to adapt to these new situations as much. And it's harder to adapt. It's harder. I remember when my wife and I first got married, we had 3 kids, and I decided I wanted to go back to graduate school and move, halfway across the country to Nevada, to the University of Nevada in Reno. And my parents were like, are you crazy? Like, what are you doing? How can you just up and move? You've got 3 kids. And I was like, Casey will find a job and I'll do part-time work and go to school. And I don't, unless my memory, your memory is always biased to a degree, but I don't remember being that stressed out about starting. It was exciting. And I didn't
Mm-hmm.
even think really bad things could, I like, we'll figure it out. Like, where are you going to live? We'll find a place. It's going to be easy. And now, if you told me I had to move a year from now, so I had a year to prepare, and it's only 30 miles away, I would be stressed for the next, like, how are we going to do this? I don't know if this is ever going to come together. How are we going to find a place? And, you have so many experiences that it's harder to adapt to make those changes.
Right.
So
Right.
that's one side of it. Learning is different because learning takes effort. Like, your brain is wired to adapt. It figures out how to fit in to survive, because there's a survival component to it, and even how to thrive. That's the adaptability. But learning is different. Learning takes effort. So I'm thinking back to when I was in graduate school. I don't know if you've heard of Alan Gardner. The Gardners, Alan and Beatrix Gardner, were the researchers that took some chimpanzees and raised them as cross fosterlings. And so
I
they
have
raised
never
them as,
heard of them. No.
okay, they raised them as their own children, and to try to see if they could, because this was a study on language. And
Okay.
there'd been people that had been trying to teach chimpanzees language by, vocalizing it, having them vocalize certain things, and they weren't very successful at it. And there'd also, because also you have the issue of, you bring a chimpanzee out of their cage for an hour or two a day to interact with them, then you put them back in the cage. So that's probably, learning is going to be hindered anyway because of the setup. So the idea of cross fosterlings, you get them when they're babies and you raise them in your home, and then they're around language as it develops more naturally. And so the Gardeners were going, they're not, so they were saying chimpanzees can't learn language because they can only vocalize 1 or 2 words or whatever sounds.
Mm-hmm.
And they were thinking, but that maybe they don't have maybe their vocal cords aren't built to vocalize in that sense, but they use their hands all the time. So let's teach them American Sign Language. So
Yeah.
they
Mm-hmm.
raised chimpanzees teaching them American Sign Language, and found that they learned a lot of signs, like over 200 signs, and they could create their own signs. It's really fascinating stuff. If you want to
Wow.
read it at some point, their first chimpanzee was named Washoe because University of Nevada is in Washoe County.
Washoe County. Yeah.
Yeah. So I took one of his classes, and the Gardeners were one of the reasons I was excited to go to the University of Nevada. But I took his class in comparative psychology, where you're comparing humans and non-humans in different ways. And one of the things that stood out to me as a really early graduate student, and I have 3 kids at home, remember, at this time, and they're
Uh-huh.
ages 2 to 5. But he was talking about, this idea that our kids' brains are like sponges and they learn faster than adults. And that's why they can pick up a language so fast, because, and adults, it's hard to learn language, but kids just learn it so quickly. And he said, stop and think about that for a minute. What if, as an adult, you went and lived with somebody, and you didn't have to do anything. You just laid around. They took care of you. They talked to you all the time. They would hold up things, say, look at this little thing. Look at this. This is a ball. Look at the ball. Look at the dog. Look at this stuffed animal. And they would feed you. They would change your diapers. I mean, you literally had to do nothing but try to listen to what they were saying and put it together to try to understand and make sounds. He said, you could probably learn a language in just a few months doing that. And it takes babies like 2 years. Like they're taking way too long. We're way smarter than they are. Was his way of putting it kind of into context. So the learning part is probably, it's not that they can learn faster than us, but they can adapt faster. So when we think kids learn like sponges, there's also kind of a contextual side to it. They'll pick up a saying that parents have, and then they'll use it in a similar setting. We go, oh, look at that, but they're not really understanding what they're saying yet. So they can mimic in that way, but that's still not really learning. So it's probably, when they use sayings and things, it's probably more like adapting than it is.
Because yesterday, the phrase from my 4-year-old granddaughter, which I made a big deal about, we all did, but she said, of course, because, we're decorating cookies. And I said, hey, this is shaped like this gingerbread is shaped like a tree. Are you going to put green on this? And she said, of course.
Of course. What's wrong with you?
It was delivered and I was like, where did that come from? She's so smart. We're back to this again, right? Mm-hmm. But she more than likely heard her mom or dad say, of course. But to your point, because now it's making sense. She didn't really know the context. She didn't know what that really meant and why we were making such a big deal of it. She was mimicking what she had heard one of her parents say, or
she probably didn't understand all the nuances behind it.
Right. And why I was making such a big deal about it.
But when you do and you laugh, she's probably more likely to use it again.
Yes. And she used it like 4 times yesterday because I made this big deal about her using it, and then other times. But the thing is, she was using it in what I believe to be the right circumstance, right? She'd be asked a question and she'd go, of course.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I should say kids are smart.
Yeah.
So they do learn that.
But we're just talking about this idea that because what you've inspired me to do is I am going to move to France and just find someone to lay on their couch for 2 months.
Yeah. Just have them feed
the diaper thing's out, but they're just going to feed me and take care of me for 2 months. And I'm going to learn French.
You'll learn it probably in less than 2 years.
I love it. But in all seriousness, the idea that, I think what I took from this part is what I didn't have before, the difference between learning and adapting.
Yeah.
And we are very good at adapting, I think. But,
kids and adults, and maybe kids even better.
Yeah. But the learning part is where the difference. That's really where.
And that's neuroplasticity. Yeah. Our brains are plastic. So the brain kind of wires itself through learning. So we can all rewire our brain, whether we're kids or adults, but kids don't have like special powers to do that more than adults. We can all do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Well, John, thank you again. As always, this was very informative for me. I really appreciate it. I look forward to talking to you again next week.
I'm looking forward to it too.
Thank you.
See you, Sean.
Okay.